The driver's seat let out a soft sigh as Jonathan Miller settled in, the familiar sound of buttery leather and success. It was the punctuation mark at the end of another grueling 14-hour day. As the CEO and founder of Innovate Corp., a tech empire worth north of $200 million, Jonathan's life was a symphony of quiet luxury, the hushed reverence of his boardroom, the polite applause at conferences, the satisfying click of another multi-million-dollar deal closing. His world was ordered, controlled, and quiet. It only made noise when he told it to. He reached for the ignition, his mind already jumping to the next day's agenda, the next quarter's projections, the next mountain to conquer. But before his finger could press the button, a voice, small but sharp as a shard of glass, sliced through the car's conditioned silence. "Shut up." Jonathan froze. His hand hovered in midair. The voice hadn't come from his state-of-the-art sound system. It was high-pitched, and laced with an urgency that felt totally alien in his sanitized world. He turned his head slowly, his brow furrowing in a mix of disbelief and irritation. And there, in the back of his six-figure sedan, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. A small, black child with eyes so wide they seemed to swallow her face, filled with a terror so profound it made the air in the car feel thin and cold. She was hunched down, trying her best to disappear into the black leather. Jonathan's mind scrambled to make sense of the situation. "Excuse me," he managed, the words dripping with the astonishment of a man whose fortress had just been breached. The little girl shook her head frantically, her braids tapping against her shoulders. She pressed a tiny finger to her lips, and her voice dropped to a desperate, trembling whisper that was somehow even more commanding than her shout. "Don't talk," she pleaded. "And don't start the car. They're watching." She flicked her gaze toward the towering glass monolith of the Innovate Corp headquarters behind them. A cold dread, foreign and unwelcome, began to creep into Jonathan's bones. Who were they? And why on earth was this terrified child hiding in his car, issuing warnings like a character in a spy movie? In that single moment, the entire, carefully built world of Jonathan Miller began to tremble, shaken by the whisper of a frightened little girl. Section 1, The World of Jonathan Miller. To really get why this rattled him so much, you have to know a thing or two about Jonathan Miller. At 52, Jonathan wasn't just a CEO, he was, as the magazines loved to say, an architect of the future. He'd built Innovate Corp from a garage startup into a global titan based on one simple principle: data is the new oil, and he was the best driller in the world. His life was a monument to relentless ambition. He woke at 4:30 a.m. Not to birds chirping, but to the glow of international market reports. Breakfast was a protein shake chugged during a conference call. His relationships were transactions, his friendships strategic. People respected him, feared him, and left him profoundly alone, though he would have called it self-sufficient. His employees saw him as a force of nature, a brilliant but distant mind who saw people as assets and liabilities, cogs in his giant, gleaming machine. He could tell you the projected third-quarter revenue of a new app down to the penny, but he probably couldn't name the janitor who cleaned his office every night. That, he'd argue, was the facilities manager's job, a perfect delegation in a system built for peak performance. Empathy was a variable he'd long ago coded out of his personal operating system. It was inefficient. His latest and greatest achievement, the one that would cement his legacy, was the Nightingale Project. On the surface, it was a masterpiece of corporate charity. A free, revolutionary platform designed to empower underserved neighborhoods with job-hunting resources, financial literacy courses, and a social network to connect neighbors. The press hailed it as a landmark in ethical tech. Jonathan accepted awards for it, delivering polished speeches about digital inclusivity and bridging the economic divide. He genuinely believed in it, not just as a PR coup, but as a perfect blend of profit and progress. Nightingale was his Mona Lisa, a flawless system. At his side through it all was Marcus Vance, his COO and hand-picked protégé. Marcus was a younger, smoother, more socially adept version of Jonathan, the velvet glove on Jonathan's iron fist. Jonathan trusted him completely, seeing his own youthful hunger reflected back at him. Together, they were unstoppable. The Nightingale project was as much Marcus's triumph as it was Jonathan's, a fact Marcus always made sure to mention. Jonathan saw it as loyalty. He was blind to the fact that a perfect reflection can also be a perfect mask. This was the man in the driver's seat. A man who believed in systems, in data, in the clean, predictable logic of the world he'd built. A man now staring into the terrified eyes of a child who represented everything his world was designed to shut out: chaos, emotion, and a terrifying, unpredictable humanity. The system had just failed. An unknown variable had entered the equation, and it was threatening to crash the whole program. Section 2, The Unraveling Thread. The silence in the car stretched on, thick with the girl's fear and Jonathan's confusion. His first instinct screamed, "Call security." It was the logical, procedural thing to do. An unauthorized person was in his car. But he couldn't. The sheer terror in her eyes held him in place. A man who moved markets with a single word was being held hostage by the silent plea of a child. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. "Maya," she whispered, the sound barely there. "You have to be quiet. They'll see." "Who will see, Maya?" She pointed a trembling finger toward his building's gleaming lobby. Through the tinted glass, he could see his partner, Marcus Vance, standing beside a woman with a sharp blonde bob, Evelyn Reed, the formidable project lead for Nightingale. They were laughing, their heads close together. To anyone else, it was a picture of success. But seen through Maya's eyes, it looked sinister. "My mom says they don't like people who ask questions," Maya whispered. She said they listen to everything. A new feeling pricked at Jonathan: annoyance. This was ridiculous. His top executives weren't villains from a fairy tale. The girl was probably lost, her mother worried sick. "Where is your mother, Maya?" he asked, trying to sound calm. She's cleaning. "In your building. Floor 42. His floor. Jonathan's mind spun. He didn't know the cleaners' names, but he knew they came in after he left. For her mother to be on his floor now meant she was working a late, unscheduled shift. "Why?" "I need to find your mother," Jonathan said, making a decision that went against every one of his internal protocols. "We can't stay here. Will you let me drive away? I promise I won't talk. We'll just go." Maya hesitated, her big eyes searching his face for a trap. She must have seen a man who looked just as lost as she felt, because she gave a tiny, hesitant nod. Jonathan started the car. The engine's purr, usually a comfort, now felt like a roaring announcement of their presence. He pulled out of his reserved spot, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Marcus and Evelyn were still there, shrinking in the distance. Were they actually watching? Or was he just catching this kid's paranoia? He drove in silence, the only sound Maya's shallow, shaky breaths from the back seat. He had no idea where he was going. He just knew he couldn't go home. His house was a fortress of smart devices, all hooked into the Innovate Corp network. If there was even a shred of truth to what this girl was saying, his home was the last place he should be. He pulled into the deserted parking lot of a 24-hour diner. Turning in his seat, he asked gently, "Maya, what is your mother's name?" "Sarah," the girl whispered. "Sarah Johnson." The name meant nothing. "You said your mom told you they don't like questions." "What kind of questions?" "About the program," Maya said, her voice a little stronger now. "The one with the nice bird. The Nightingale." A cold knot formed in Jonathan's stomach. "What about the program?" "She said it was supposed to help us. After Dad got sick and we lost our apartment. She used it to find jobs. But then the calls started. Mean people calling all the time. They knew everything. They knew we had no money. They said we had to pay them back for stuff we never bought. The pieces began clicking into place, forming a picture he desperately didn't want to see. He pulled out his personal, non-company phone and typed Sarah Johnson into his company's HR portal. Her file popped up. A cleaner, hired by a third-party contractor. Model employee for 3 years. Then, 6 months ago, a flurry of activity. A formal complaint filed. The details were redacted, but the subject line was crystal clear: complaint regarding unethical data usage by Project Nightingale. Beneath it was the resolution summary: internal review by project lead Evelyn Reed. Conclusion: no evidence of malpractice. Employees' claims unsubstantiated, likely stemming from personal financial mismanagement. Case closed. The report was co-signed by Marcus Vance. It was all there. A neat, tidy, corporate burial of a problem. His problem. The problem now sitting in the back seat of his car. That nice bird hadn't been singing a song of hope. It was a bird of prey. And the people he trusted most in the world, Marcus and Evelyn, had been feeding it. The diner's coffee was bitter and tasted like reality. Jonathan sat in a worn vinyl booth, watching Maya cautiously sip a hot chocolate. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he felt the crushing weight of his own ignorance. He'd built the engine and celebrated its power, but he'd never bothered to look at what it was crushing under its wheels. "Maya," he said, leaning forward. "I need you to be very brave and tell me everything your mother told you." And she did. In the simple, halting words of a 7-year-old, she painted a devastating picture. She talked about her mom's hope when she first signed up for Nightingale. Then she described the change. The endless calls from aggressive debt collectors. The confusing, threatening letters. The day they packed their lives into trash bags after being evicted from the only home Maya had ever known. She remembered her mother crying, holding her phone, and screaming that the Bird app had ruined them. She tried to fight back. She went to the company, "Your company," Maya said, and tried to warn people. But no one listened. They just told her she was confused. "She hid me in your car today," Maya finished, her voice a whisper again. "She said you were the only one who could stop the bird. The man at the very, very top. She said maybe you just didn't know. Maybe you just didn't know." The words echoed in the hollow space of Jonathan's guilt. Was that his excuse? Ignorance? He, the data king who prided himself on knowing everything, had been oblivious to the rot in his own company. Or worse, had he just chosen not to see it? He knew what he had to do. This was a conspiracy, happening under his roof, using his tech. He needed hard, undeniable proof. After checking Maya into a small hotel under a fake name, paid in cash, he promised her he would bring her mother back. Then his real work started. He couldn't go to his office or use his network, he was locked out of his own kingdom. But a king always builds a back door. He drove to a nondescript office park, home to a small cybersecurity firm he'd secretly acquired years ago, Skunkworks team working on experimental tech, completely isolated from Innovate Corp. Ben, the lead analyst and a brilliant paranoid programmer, looked up in shock. "Mr. Miller? What's going on?" "I need you to hack your own parent company," Jonathan said, his voice grim. "I need the unfiltered data stream from the Nightingale project. And I need every email and internal message between Marcus Vance and Evelyn Reed for the past year." Ben's eyes widened. "Sir, that's corporate espionage. I could go to jail. You could go to jail." "The alternative is worse," Jonathan said. "People are being hurt. Find me the truth, Ben. I need to know what they've done." For the next 12 hours, they descended into the digital guts of Innovate Corporation. And what they found was worse than Jonathan could have imagined. The Nightingale project was a work of predatory genius. It used its community-building features as a Trojan horse to harvest data, specifically targeting users searching for terms like debt relief, food banks, or overdue rent. It built detailed profiles, identifying the most desperate and vulnerable. Then they found the smoking gun, a hidden API connecting Nightingale's database directly to a consortium of the country's most notorious predatory lenders. For a hefty fee, these companies got a real-time, curated list of human desperation. It was a digital feeding frenzy, and Innovate Corp was ringing the dinner bell. The emails between Marcus and Evelyn were chilling. They talked about their victims not as people, but as lead conversions and revenue streams. They celebrated when their algorithms pushed a user toward a loan with a 400% interest rate. They laughed about Sarah Johnson's complaint, calling her a nuisance. There was even a memo from Marcus to the board. With Jonathan deliberately left off the list, outlining the project's secondary monetization phase, which predicted that selling user data would soon become the company's biggest source of revenue. Jonathan felt sick. His legacy wasn't a bridge to the future, it was a pipeline funneling the desperate into financial ruin. He thought of Maya, asleep in a strange hotel, her life destroyed by a line of code he had approved. The question was no longer what he would do. It was how he would make them pay. Section 4, The Reckoning. The next morning, Jonathan Miller walked into his headquarters not as a CEO, but as an Avenger, a secured hard drive in his briefcase. He'd already made 2 calls, one to a trusted, old-school board member to secure his support, and another to a private security detail to find Sarah Johnson and bring her to a safe location. He sent a single, terse email, emergency board meeting. My office. 10 a.m. attendance is mandatory. At 10, the board filed in, confused and concerned. Marcus and Evelyn sat opposite Jonathan, looking confident, even smug, clearly ready to handle whatever minor crisis was at hand. Good morning, Jonathan began, his voice ice-cold. I've called this meeting because I have discovered a catastrophic failure within this company. A failure of ethics, of humanity, and of leadership. Marcus leaned forward, a perfect mask of concern on his face. Jonathan, what is it? If there's a problem, we'll fix it. We always do. Oh, there's a problem, Marcus, Jonathan said, his eyes locking onto his COO. And it's called the Nightingale Project. A flicker of panic crossed Evelyn's face. Marcus, however, stayed cool. Jonathan, Nightingale is our greatest success. The social impact is. I'm not interested in your manufactured numbers, Jonathan cut in, plugging the hard drive into the room's main display. I'm interested in the truth. And he showed them everything. The hidden API, the data streams to loan sharks, the emails celebrating human misery. The room fell dead silent. The board members looked horrified, their faces ashen. Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice tight with rage. This is a fabrication. Jonathan, you're trying to sabotage your own company based on hacked, out-of-context emails. The data is being misinterpreted. Evelyn jumped in. We provide resources. If users make poor financial choices, that isn't our responsibility. Responsibility? Jonathan's voice was dangerously low. You targeted the desperate and sold them to wolves. You don't get to call that empowerment. He looked around the table. But you don't have to take my word for it. Why don't we hear from one of the people you've empowered? He nodded to his assistant, who opened the door. Sarah Johnson walked in. She stood tall, her gaze steady, her expression filled not with fear, but with quiet, steely resolve. She looked directly at Marcus and Evelyn, who stared back as if they'd seen a ghost. My name is Sarah Johnson, she began, her voice clear and strong. I am a mother. I was a proud employee of this company's cleaning service. And I was a victim of the Nightingale Project. For 10 minutes, she told her story. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the facts, the hope she'd had, and the systematic way it was twisted into a weapon against her. She described the shame, the fear, and the frustration of being dismissed by the very company that caused her suffering. "You didn't see me as a person," she said, her eyes now fixed on Jonathan. "None of you did. I was just a data point. My desperation was an algorithm. My daughter, Maya, spent last night hiding in your car, Mr. Miller, because she believed you were the only one who could make the monsters go away. And your monsters," she said, turning to Marcus and Evelyn, "have corner offices on the 42nd floor." The room was utterly still. The data on the screen was damning, but the quiet dignity of this woman was the final blow. Jonathan stood up. "Marcus Vance. Evelyn Reed. You are both fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your stock options are revoked. Your severance is 0. Consider this your only warning before my legal team pursues criminal charges." Marcus shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "You can't do this, Jonathan. I built this with you." "No," Jonathan replied, his voice like ice. "You built something else entirely. And now, I'm going to tear it down." Section 5, The Deconstruction. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The news of the firing sent Innovate Corp stock into a nosedive. The tech world exploded with speculation. But Jonathan didn't hide. He met the storm head-on. He called a company-wide town hall that afternoon and told the complete, unvarnished truth. He confessed his own ignorance and his failure of oversight. He took full responsibility. He announced that the Nightingale project was being shut down, every line of code erased, every server wiped. Then, he made a promise. He announced the Innovate Restitution Fund, seeded with $50 million of his own money to compensate every single person harmed by Nightingale. It would cover not just the predatory loans, but the emotional distress and loss of dignity they'd suffered. And he announced that the fund would be run by the one person he knew he could trust to do it right, Sarah Johnson. After a moment of stunned silence, she accepted. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan systematically dismantled the toxic culture Marcus had built. He commissioned a full, independent audit. He created a new ethics board with real power. He rewrote the company's mission from market disruption to human-centric innovation.